My second alternate history book review is The Years of Rice and Salt by Kim Stanley Robinson. The Years of Rice and Salt chronicles a world in which 99.9% of Europeans are killed by the Black Death, while the rest of the world only has a third of their population die for some reason. The Years of Rice and Salt is written like a James Michener novel, in which it covers hundreds of years starting with around 1400 and ending with the present. It uses Buddhist theology, in which there are two main characters who are continually reincarnated and are connected in fate with each other. The setting covers most of the world, but is mainly in Asia and Europe, with the Americas, Africa, and Australia not getting much coverage. Again, like all of my reviews, this is spoiler-free. I'm going to talk a bit about the lore, so if you consider that, spoilers, be warned, but nothing on characters, plot, etc. This is a rough map of the world as portrayed in The Years of Rice and Salt in roughly 1900, before their version of World War I. As with almost all alternate histories, the maps in this book aren't described in detail, so don't bitch and moan over minor details since you have no idea on how it looks either. As you can see, China became the dominant power across the Pacific, while various Islamic states rule Africa, Europe, the Atlantic world, and Western Asia. Minor powers exist like the Indian League, which dominates the Indian Ocean region, and the Iroquois, which are a major player in North America. Now this map is the map of the world after their version of the World Wars, which China narrowly won fighting against the Islamic world. However, like the British in our timeline, China was so wiped out from the war that their empire collapsed and the Burmese, Japanese, and Native Americans became major players. This video is half a book review and half an alternate history review, so I'm going to review The Years of Rice and Salt as a sheer alternate history, but also on the merits of being a book itself. And if you want to skip to the book review, click the first link in the description, which will skip over the plausibility part. The big plausibility issue with this book is what I call "why didn't this happen in our timeline" trope, or what I shorten to WDTL. Alternate history is like throwing pebbles in a pond. If you throw pebbles into the center of a pond, it will probably take a while for ripples to reach the edge. This is how I design alternate histories. One thing affects another, which affects another thing, but it can still take hundreds of years for it to reach a far-off part of the world. For example, my What If the Vikings Colonized America timeline starts in Norway around 1000 AD, but it takes 200 years for it to reach Greece and 500 for it to reach South America, and God knows when for sub-Saharan Africa or East Asia. This means that events in South America or Japan should be the same for hundreds of years until something from one of the affected regions gets there, so you should still have Genghis Khan and Pachacudi existing in this timeline. This is far more acute in pre-industrial / age of exploration alternate histories, in which huge stretches of the world were disconnected from each other. Of course, you could use butterfly effect logic, saying everything affects everything, thus meaning even a small change affects history in massive ways. Like saying that if you broke a toaster in the 30s, Stalin's cryogenically frozen head dominates the Earth today and is colonizing Mars. But that makes the entire genre of alternate history impossible, or can be used as a complete lazy hack for not doing work or research on how history actually works and just making shit up. This is where the vast majority of implausibilities fall for The Years of Rice and Salt. For example, Robinson has an amazing inventor developing advanced technology in 17th century Samarkand. My issue with this is that there were like 2 European adventurers in Samarkand in this time period, and so why does the change exist? Another one, the Chinese invade Japan and discover America in the 16th century. What was preventing them from doing this? The only European presence in the region were 2 Jesuits. The most egregious form of this is that in The Years of Rice and Salt, the Asian nations have roughly the same technological speed of progress as the West had in our timeline. It never addresses how the Islamic world went into technological stagnation after 1000 AD, or the Chinese did roughly the same after 1200, for reasons that had nothing to do with the West. This is never addressed or dealt with. Yeah, almost all of the issues with this alternate history's plausibility relate to WDTL. Almost everything in this book could theoretically have happened, but not with this timeline's point of departure. There are 2 main things I have issues with besides the WDTL. The first is that Robinson has the Iroquois forming a confederation of all the North American native tribes against the Chinese who are colonizing the West Coast and the Arabs who are colonizing the East Coast. This is so misrepresentative of Native Americans. It does what a lot of people do, in which they clump all Native Americans together into the same culture, while in reality they were radically different culturally, and the many different tribes actually despised each other. The idea that communications could be kept across a confederation that would include ways of life as disparate as the hunter-gatherer plains nomads like the Sioux, urban city dwellers like the Cahokians, and forest tribes like the Iroquois is kind of ridiculous. Also, having the Iroquois unite the native tribes is kind of like having the Nazis uniting all of Earth into Greater Germanica if aliens invaded in World War II to fight off the aliens. The Iroquois were completely despised by all the tribes who surrounded them. They committed genocide against plenty of tribes, were constantly at war and subjugating all the tribes around them, and in general were enormous psychotic assholes. Secondly, having the Manchus run a naval empire is ridiculous. In our timeline, the Manchus forbade all naval travel for hundreds of years. Even after they assimilated to Chinese culture, their foreign policy was that of the nomadic barbarian tribe. They had no respect for naval travel and put most of their energies into conquering Central Asia. If the Manchus conquered China, the Chinese colonies in America and Australia would have simply split off and become independent, kind of like if France conquered Britain in the Seven Years' War, America would declare independence. Something that bothers me with this timeline is how many nations get shafted for this space-filling Chinese empire. Japan is wiped out by China for no reason whatsoever. Thailand is wiped out with no explanation, while the Aztecs and Inca are conquered with no mention or any real reason. A big issue with this timeline's plot that relates to the timeline is that everything is so derivative. Except the first chapter, which sets the stage, literally every chapter is completely ripped off from something in our timeline. Let me briefly run them down. Chapter 2, Plymouth Rock. Chapter 3, Columbus. Chapter 4, Isaac Newton. Chapter 5, Japan's industrialization. Chapter 6, Voltaire and Madame Denise. Chapter 7, Napoleon/the Industrial Revolution. Chapter 8, World War I. Chapter 9, The Cultural Revolution of the 60s and the Feminist Movement. Chapter 10, The Modern World and the Fall of the Soviet Union. I'm fine if you have some allusion in alternate histories to our own timeline, but when you write an alternate history, you need to write an alternate history, not a names-changed version of our own timeline. The main issue with this book's plot is that it's based around the historical events. The characters just plot along trying to fulfill the general outline of our timeline's historical events, so if you know real history, you're going to know the plot of most of this book. I originally had a problem with the religious element of this alternate history, mainly because alternate history needs to be divided from religion to work. For example, I'm a Christian in my personal life, but I put that away with alternate history and try to only use logic, because how would you feel if I randomly threw the hand of God into my alternate histories and justified it by saying Deus Vult? But it actually worked out well. You were able to keep the same characters through reincarnation, throughout the whole book, so you wouldn't have to run into the James Michener paradox, where you learn to care about characters from a certain time period, but their author needs to jump forward, and so you have to abandon them. Speaking of the characters, they suck. They're roughly the same level as The Man in the High Castle, but the thing is, this book is 4 times the length of The Man in the High Castle, has 2 characters instead of The Man in the High Castle's 20, and this was written in a time when science fiction's characterization in general had improved a great deal. The only thing you get about these 2 characters is that one is vaguely aggressive while the other is vaguely timid. It's interesting to see, however, which characters succeed in which time periods due to their character traits and places in society. The book looks really long when you look at it in the bookstore, clocking more than 800 pages, but given the sheer scope of the book, this isn't really an issue, since there's simply so much history and world to cover, and better a single long book than Harry Turtledove's 10-book series is. An issue that this book doesn't have, but most Robinson books reek of, is preachiness. I can't read anything by Robinson anymore, because they just become soapboxes to preach politically correct messages. Nothing against political correctness, or political messages in general, it's just that when I pick up a book, I want to read a story. I don't want to be preached at, and so if your book has a political message, make sure the story is damn good, so it doesn't come across as preachy. This is what separates 1984 Les Miserables, which are some of the greatest books ever written, from Ferngully and Christian rap, which are abominations unto mankind. However, this book mainly escapes this and is minimally preachy, spending minimal time preaching about the environment, multiculturalism, and overpopulation. The thing this book really succeeds at is style. This book feels so epic. Towards the end, the book feels like a really good fantasy novel, along the lines of Lord of the Rings instead of a normal alternate history. The world building is fabulous. The world feels so different from ours, yet so real. This is the most prominent part of the book that you'll think back to from when you read it. As I have said before, my rating system is based off if I like the book, it gets above a 5, and if I disliked it, it gets beneath a 5. I give this book a 3. I inevitably left disappointed due to the poor characterization, derivative alternate history, and unimaginative plot. On the pros, it's a really imaginative world building, epic scope, and clever setup. So in general, this book had enormous potential, which was wasted by bad execution. Plus, I really wanted this alternate history to work. There are so many Western post-industrial alternate histories that a good Eastern alternate history starting in the Middle Ages would have been a breath of fresh air. Whatifalthist, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed that video, you might enjoy my own personal What If Europe Was Wiped Out by the Black Death timeline, the link to which you can click on now. And as always, subscribe, comment, and stay tuned for my next video. Have a great day.